What's up, guys? This is Infinite Flash here. Today I'm going to be talking about what happened in round 9 of the Sinquefield Cup, the second game of this three-game a day tournament. And in this game we have Fabiano Caruana, the tournament leader. The tournament winner, actually, he won yesterday by drawing Carlson. He's on 7.5 out of 8. Clear winner with 2 rounds to go. He's playing Nakamura, who's in last place. Let's see what Caruana could do against Nakamura. In this position, Caruana I think Caruana is playing almost everything too, just like Carlsen, but he started with e5, and I mean I don't really want to spend too much time on the opening because this is a Roy Lopez Berlin variation where we get this really famous endgame after knight d6, bishop takes, and pawn takes over here, and pretty much I don't like this kind of chess really being seen. It's not really fun to watch. No offense to you. E4, E5 players, but I really don't like seeing the Berlin Wall just draw every game. And now this, by the way, I should mention, this position is was played by Nakamura pretty much instantly until like move 21 maybe, something crazy, maybe move 20, I can't remember, but this position is really normal. H3 again, G4. I think we saw this in Nakamura Topalov in the game I just posted today. And in this position, black has quite a number of moves. I'm not really familiar with all the theory, but king e8 is a normal idea. It develops the knight over here. Black plays h5 to prevent g4. At least after g4, you can take here and play knight h4, trying to rely on the rook activating itself. There are a lot of unusual positions where black can try to swing this rook over, and I think we might run into one in this game. Bishop f4 developing normally. Notice that white might play e6 at some point, and try to trade off this pawn for the c7 pawn. Maybe sometime in the future, not immediately. Bishop e7 looks normal. Both sides are pretty much developing their pieces in this position, and in this position, often for white in the Berlin is the problem is the light squared bishop in this position. So Caruana logically played knight g5 in this position, and of course this is all opening preparation. So I guess Nakamura pretty much played this all instantly. Rook h6 to protect the bishop, rook fe1 developing the last piece in the position, bishop b4 pinning that. I mean, it's really boring to talk about the opening, and as this was all preparation, and the really interesting stuff happens in a few more moves. Knight e7 to back up the knight back up here. White takes the bishop, and based off pawn structure at the moment, you'd think logically that white would be better, and certainly he can play bishop d2 and hold on to this pawn maybe with f4. That would have been my choice if I was white. He played king g2 instead, though, bringing up the king further, and in this position, Nakamura traded one more rook off the position, so he can hide with his king out of the center, and pretty safe over here. He would try to find it safe over there in that position. Rook takes d8, king takes, rook d1 check, king c8. Yeah, and pretty much in this position, black is just threatening to double white's pawns, and the e5 pawn is weak after knight g6, so Caruana decided to play bishop g3 in this position. There's not really a way to really prevent that without the e5 pawn dropping, I think. And Nakamura took his chance, doubled the pawns over here. This is not necessarily bad, but somehow the game became interesting after this. In this position, by the way, Nakamura played rook g6. Maybe c5, trying to activate the rook over here to attack the weak pawns over here, is a slightly better option. I'm not sure though. In this position, Nakamura played rook g6, attacking the g4 pawn, and after this, white defended this with the rook lift over here. And here Nakamura pretty much tries to trade off the pawns over here, and eventually try to bring over the king over to this square perhaps, and try to hold the position. Obviously, black cannot be better in this position. I think this 3-on-2 majority is pretty much kind of dictating the terms over here for white. So black tries to play f5 and break down the structure immediately. White doesn't usually want to. White obviously doesn't want to take here because the knight takes in. Well, you're taking up the bishop, or at least you're getting strong pressure with this fork. So that's not ideal, obviously, for white. Instead of just taking there, white took en passant instead, and in this position, I think, give me a second. Yeah, I guess for some reason I thought en passant would have been played. I got my move orders mixed up. I think in the game White played bishop h4, gaining this tempo against the knight, and after this, I think black played my God, bishop h4. I think black played c5, gaining this tempo against the rook here, not allowing the bishop to capture over here. Notice that black can't really move the knight because of rook d8 checkmate, so that would be pretty embarrassing to allow that. I think if you did, I mean, okay, so you can't allow that, but you kind of get the point. c5 was designed to kick this rook away. White played rook f4, perhaps getting rook f8 at a later point. Black played knight d5, rook takes f5, rook takes g4, and now bishop g3. All these moves look really, really natural, and in this position, things start to get really, really interesting. I think Nakamura in this position played king d8, and the idea is probably not to run into e6 check with some weird complications with the bishop taking here at some moment. Okay, and the idea is that after king d7, e6 check, if you king takes over here, I think the whole idea is that probably white plays rook e5 in this position, and I think you get one of the crazier pawn races in this kind of forced position. Black has to play king d6, right? And the only problem is this drops a rook after rook e4. But black can counter sacrifice in this position. And what you see on the board is probably one of the more crazy ones with f takes g3, knight takes here, rook g4, allowing black to take another pawn, rook g6 check first to force the black king not to go forward. But I mean, also you can just take the pawn. It doesn't really matter. You get this pass pawn over here, but what is this pawn mess? So not really clear at all. I think Nakamura really wanted something safe in comparison to that position. Black can also play king c6, by the way, in this position, but I don't know, rook e5 or something. The pawn is supported well, and I don't know, knight f6, f4, king f3 is coming, king d6, king f3, king e7 to blockade the pawn. I don't know. This stuff is with the pass pawn over here. White shouldn't be doing too badly. This was certainly possible for black though. So instead of king d7, he played king d8 instead. And in this position, I think after this, not king d7, king d8, sir, king d8. White played king h3 first. Also, another idea is that he can play e6 in this position, and probably after knight f6, forcing the knight back. And one idea is that rook f7 was also possible, putting some pressure on the 7th rank. Rook f8 also is another idea if black didn't play this. I think we just get this rook takes e5, c6 continuation when the position is fairly solid for both sides. White has weak pawns over here. You cannot really push the pawn over here, and black should be doing okay in that position. So after king d8, I think, god darn this PGN, I'm trying to find all the moves here. King h3 was played, and in this position, I think, yeah, black just decided to drop back the rook over here. I don't think really active possibilities are great for black here. I mean, most of the plays focus in the center, so white might actually try to pick up the g7 pawn, and these two pawns would be very, very dangerous in the center for white if he can get them rolling. So black brought the rook back here in the defense over here to blockade the pawn. And in this position, white decided to kick the knight here, forcing matters immediately. And in this position, I think Nakamura is making a very, very serious mistake. Here, he should probably play knight c3. And, after rook f8 check, king e7, rook b8, attacking the pawn, getting some counterplay. Black should be doing fine with b6, rook b7, getting some more attacks on the position. And, this kind of position is, probably okay for white, for both sides. I mean, for black, sorry. And, black is doing quite okay in this position. I think the rook can activate itself. Maybe knight takes here first. When or maybe not takes there. What would black do in this? Maybe even knight d2. Probably getting into c4 pawn is good for black, or okay for black. I'm not sure about the objective valuation. Black should be able to draw the game though. In this kind of position, I think he has got active enough pieces though. So knight c3 is a bit brave looking. So in it kind of looks natural to play knight e7, bringing one more piece to defend the side of the board where white has got the advantage over here on the king side. if you kind of split the board in half into this section. Maybe that's what Nakamura was thinking, but the problem is this just concretely does not work, I think, because of rook f8, and the king has to move here now, and white pushes f4, has this potential to push the pawn over here, with the king to support it over here. And the black rook is not so great and active in this kind of position, so yeah, here I think black is just pretty much struggling in this position. Notice that if you play like a move like rook h6, this doesn't do anything to help his position, as the king is now activating itself, so king e6 instead was played to blockade on the f5 squares. So yeah, in this position, there's some pretty interesting tactical complications here. In this position, Caruana played the good move bishop h4, and the idea is that rook e8 is threatened. So this is kind of embarrassing that the perfectly natural move, knight f5, I think is just losing the game actually. And do you know why? It's because of this kind of weird move, bishop g5 check. And black is in kind of a zugzwang here in this position with, he can't move the rook at all. He can't move the king at all because the knight is hanging. And you can't really move the knight probably because of, let's see, what would white play? I don't know, probably just king g4 maybe with f5 coming. That looks pretty dangerous for white. Maybe in conjunction with rook e8 check and rook e7 check. Well, then f5 is probably the idea. That looks potentially really dangerous for black. So not knight f5, embarrassing enough. In this position, Nakamura played rook h6, pinning this bishop, and this kind of secures the strength over this square. And in this position, Caruana played rook e8, and the idea is that rook h6 did was to allow to push the g pawn. And in this position, with this double, let's say, two pieces on the knight, black is forced to play g5. Kind of an active way to play, and after takes over here, rook g6, blockading the pawn. Black has a pretty good blockade over here, but white can probably break it down with, like Caruana played in the game pretty well with king g4. And I don't think, king takes e5, rook takes e7 is bad. This rook is kind of passively placed, and even though black has a good blockade with the pieces here, he's got to move. That's the problem with the blockade. Eventually, your pieces have to move. They can't stick to the poses and places and just wait forever. Black is almost stuck in his zugzwang, so king f7 was played, and white decided to move the rook over here since the rook was under attack, and I think black was just getting tired of a passive position here. If you kind of look at it from black's perspective, these pawns look really intimidating, and you kind of see these pawns over here, so at least you want to swing your rook over here like Nakamura did and try to get your rook active. Maybe not taking over here, but at least have the idea of taking just in case white kind of screws up in this position. In this position, Caruana played rook h7. I'm going to flip it back over, and black played king f8. I don't think black's doing that healthy in this position. I mean, two pawns over here is probably even winning for white. I'm not really sure where Nakamura messed up. Probably at that knight c3 moment where he played knight e7, allowing this rook invasion and white to get this kind of positional configuration. It's probably not that good, but that's just kind of one idea that you could think of. Rook h7. Notice that the knight is under attack here, and notice that king here is met by rook h6, and I think the trade-off would be favorable for white given this pass pawn over here. Probably. Yeah, probably, I think. Or even after king e6, you can probably think of rook h6, king here. Or maybe king e6, bishop g3. Sorry guys, I'm trying to remember all the lines, and this is like annoying, and I don't have all the lines stored here in the PGM that I'm trying to think of. I was looking at bishop g3, and now rook h6 is a threat, so what was the point of that? And if you get rook h here is pretty annoying. g6 in combination with king h5 is very dangerous as well too. So in this position, you just wanted to bring the king back to kind of protect against the g file and the e file. Looks very natural, but rook h6, attacking this rook over here is very awkward for black, I think. And in this position, maybe he should, I don't know, you can't really take the pawn over here probably because of, I don't know, probably just g6 pushing the pawn, and black takes this pawn, then king h5, and white is getting really active in this kind of position, and there's probably no defense. Notice that if you take another pawn, really greedy, isn't it? Rook h7, king g7, and probably just bishop f6 is made actually. And if you can't play that, you have to play knight g8, and white just pushes the pawn through, and there's no defense against e7 here. Rook takes g8. So, yeah, king f8 is not looking so good. I mean, rook h6. And, I think in this position, what Nakamura played was probably the best defense with knight g6. And in this position, white brought the king further, and probably knight takes h here is not a good endgame, by the way. Notice that white will push e6, king f6, have a very, very devastating g-pawn push over here, and white should win this position, actually. So you can't really afford to trade off the knight for the bishop, so he decided to give this check. Probably the only move. I mean, maybe king g7 is a stingier defense, but I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say whether this is better than knight e7, but knight e7 kind of repeats moves in this position, encouraging king g4. And in this position, white played, let's see if I can find BGN. God, this is so frustrating. Yeah, sorry guys. In this position, I mean, I think black played king g7 actually. I'm so sorry, guys. Knight e7 is repeating moves, but maybe white would just probably drop the king back and play bishop g3, supporting the whole structure. And I mean, this is probably not savable for black. I mean, notice that if you play knight g6, probably the king is coming, I think coming back, right? Or bishop g3, right? Defending here, and this is really, really, really uncomfortable with the king infiltrating over here. So I mean, he played king g7, trying to find some salvation here, but I doubt it. I doubt that there's anything here, and I think Caruana misses his golden opportunity in this position. In this position, instead of the game continuation, he decided to drop back the bishop over here to attack the c5 pawn. I don't think this is a good move, the best move in retrospect. In this position, Caruana has pretty much a forced win, and he just missed it, unfortunately. And of course, they were in time trouble. This is move 39. It's impossible to calculate this with under a minute. The winning move is rook takes g6, and the idea is that rook takes g6 is met by e7. The pawn is about to promote if you're not careful. With this kind of deflection idea of e8 queen, the rook is going to be hanging. So king h7 is forced, e7 is pushed through, rook g8 is forced, and now white plays the next last deflection tactic to drive away the king over here. And now I think the idea is that with king g7, then bishop f6, so that's not playable, and king h6 probably this check, and we kind of get the same position where I think white. I think that this is the idea. Probably white can just infiltrate over here, or he can just play g7 and bring the king over here and push through. So that's not good, and that would have won for white, but that didn't turn out so great. So let's see if I can make the board cooperate for once. So king g7 was played, but unfortunately Caruana just missed that, and he played bishop f2, a very, very solid move, keeping everything together. But after knight e7 check, the position is much harder to win than before. King e4 was played, rook a4, getting some counterplay against the c4 pawn, and in this position, I mean, white should probably play king d3 and keep the pawn here, but in the game he played rook e6, and the problem with this move is that I mean, black can take the pawn, but it's probably not a good idea to let this king activate. I mean, okay, let's say if black takes, right? I think that, actually, I just realized that king d3 forks the rook and the knight. Sorry about that, guys. I'm a bit slow today. What the heck? Rook e6, and yeah, in this position, Nakamura, in view of this knight hanging, has to move the knight over here. Sorry about that, guys. I'm pretty slow. So sorry about that. And yeah, in this position especially, I think what Caruana should do, but didn't do, is play king d5. A good winning try, trying to take the c5 pawn, and I think there's some long and crazy lines in this position with rook a2, rook f6, trying to push the e pawn through, rook takes c2, e6. All these moves look really, really natural. Rook e2, bishop g3, and I think one idea is that, yeah, bishop g3, trying to attack this pawn over here. This pawn can't be really defended, Black could give checks, but I think king c5 actually takes the pawn over there. So he played a5, just betting all of his hopes into this move, and bishop takes c7, and this leads to just crazy, crazy lines. A4, bishop d6. You can only imagine the threats with bishop here and trying to push the pawn through. Just kind of crazy. A3, black just keeps on ignoring all of white's threats in this position with bishop f8, king g8, and g6, and oh my god, look at this. Black's king is surrounded here. Kind of a humorous display. A2, only one more square away from promotion. Bishop h6 threatening rook f8, of all things. And black probably has to give this check to get back and support the rank over there before he gets mated. Not that one, that actually was just the maiden one. Rook d2, king to c5, rook d8, and with this pass pawn over here, white probably has to bring the rook back. Rook a8, rook a1, and kind of this crazy line. And even now the position isn't too clear, but white probably has good winning chances, but it's not really that clear. Kind of a funny line. And I didn't really see anything that would be that much of an improvement for what? Oh my god, my words all mixed up too. Such a goofy guy I am. Probably the bishop doesn't really have a better square in this position. That was just one interesting line that black could have gone for. I don't know, but I mean white could have gone for with king d5, but he played king f5 instead. And okay, this allows the black rook to take over here, but I mean I think this is since white's not getting the c5 pawn here, at least in, or even bishop g3 trying to activate with the pawn now pushed. He has to pretty much rely on these two pawns to win the game if he wants to try to win at least. Played check, king f8, now rook f6. He's just trying to push his pawns next turn probably, and after king g8, I think Caruana played g6 in this position. He can also probably play e6, trying to play bishop g3 and activate his pieces, but I think rook takes c2 probably, and followed by bishop, probably e3, right? I think bishop g3 is met by rook e2. I think so, right? Rook e2? Rook e2, or actually is it, aha, rook e2. And I think I figured out the idea. Knight d4, picking up the e6 pawn is actually happening, and that's not good for white. So he's got to play bishop e3 with the idea of meeting rook e2 with king e4. Took me a while to figure that one out, and probably black pushes the c pawn, and you kind of get this other race going on here. King g7, e7, just this amazing line, these amazingly complicated lines with these pawn races. And black probably just has to sacrifice this piece, but is quite okay in this kind of position where he's getting 3 pawns, I mean, for the rook, and he should hold the worst possible endgame, which is rook versus rook and bishop in this position. Just another amazing line that kind of showed up on the board there. Really, really complicated stuff. There's a lot of lines here and a lot of depth here that I can't cover at all, but just kind of want to give you guys a glimpse. In the position here, Caruana played g6, and after this, black just decided to capture the pawn here. Pretty reasonable, right? And after bishop e3, kind of keeping the watch over the d4 square, black moved the knight here anyway, and we've reached probably a dead drawn endgame where black is giving all these checks, preventing the white pawns from being pushed, with the king kind of coming over here and black pushing the pawn here, where eventually the white rook has to be distracted, and black has enough activity in the end to probably draw this. And we kind of saw this in the game. Rook f7, d3. Notice that you can't really exchange the rooks right now because of this is not a good idea, by the way, taking the rook over here, because white's probably actually winning here. Mate on the way there. So I mean, instead of rook takes f7, of course black can just take over here, and you probably reach a fairly active position here for black, where he just keeps on pushing the pawns probably, and probably can even allow the pawn here to drop because of rook g2. He should draw this position since the g6 pawn is now falling, and the king is active enough here to give all these checks over here. And notice that white can't really get out of this here, or let's say king f5, right? And notice that white actually can't play rook f4 here and have this resource to try to promote the pawns, because black always has this fast pawn, and black would win there. So it's probably a draw in the end there. I don't like how rook endgames are always drawish. I wish they were more decisive. A bit sad. You always want like kind of a decisive result. But nonetheless, this is a pretty exciting result in itself. Let's see if I can find the game. In the game, instead of rook f2, I think Nakamura played d3, and this is a good move, I think, just pushing the pawn. Past pawns must be pushed, and after rook d7, rook f2, this king is pretty much forced to go back and forth. I think if king e4, well, he played king g5, rook g2, and we got a draw here with this kind of perpetual line where eventually they agreed to a draw in this position. Notice that if white tries to play for a win with king e6, probably rook d2 is pretty harmful, and these pawns are a bit stagnant. Knowing that the king can never leave the d file because of promotion, noticing that the f file is covered by the rook, so the king can't actually get off this file to push the pawn. And if the king cannot get off the file, and with the black king protecting this pawn, this is actually really dangerous since black has all these passed pawns over here. Black rook is stuck here. Black rook is tied to this pawn. King is stuck over here. White can't actually win this position, so you can't push for a win. You just have to be content with taking this draw over here in this kind of way. A bit of a disappointing result for Caruana. Okay, to be honest, the opening was completely opening preparation, really. And I didn't really bother going through it because the interesting moment came over here when white got f4 and suddenly got these couple pawns over here suddenly, and not really clear what Nakamura stuff. Probably with that knight c3 move that he didn't play and decided to play knight f8, allowing rook f8 with that infiltration. But white got some serious activity here. And unfortunately, after king g7 instead of knight e7 that Nakamura played, Caruana missed the win in time trouble with rook takes g6, an immediate win. When rook takes here, e6 would have promoted the pawn eventually for white and would have won. But other than that, a pretty exciting game, I would say. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you like this video. I think Caruana is on 8 out of 9, so he draws another game, unfortunately. Nakamura draws against the tournament leader. At least his tournament isn't all bad. So a bit of a, neither player is satisfied, but at least Nakamura didn't lose today, so he's a bit satisfied with that. Thanks for watching, guys.